There are a lot of swimmers that have pretty good freestyles until they have to breathe. And unfortunately, unless they're an expert at the 50, swimmers are going to have to breathe. So when swimmers struggle with their breathing and it's killing their speed, the only way they can take the next step is learn how to breathe more effectively. Let's dive into how to make that happen. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. Breathing is an absolutely critical skill in freestyle. More than just about any stroke, poor breathing can really disrupt the rhythm, the timing, the alignment, and the propulsion that's created during freestyle. And if swimmers have a poor breath, it can wreck an otherwise effective stroke. And because swimmers need to breathe in every event other than the 50, they have to figure out how to breathe effectively if they want to swim fast. So why does breathing matter? Well, it affects the three primary skills that lead to fast swimming. It negatively affects alignment, it negatively affects propulsion, and it negatively affects timing. So from an alignment perspective, if you move the head, the body's going to react. So if the head lifts up, the hips are going to drop. If the head moves to the side, the hips are going to go the other way. And so all of a sudden, if that head's moving around when swimmers are breathing, they're either going to be swimming at an angle or they're going to be bouncing up and down from a horizontal perspective. And from a lateral perspective, they're going to be going side to side. And the more swimmers deviate from moving straight forward, the more resistance they create. The more resistance they create, the slower they go. But it's not just an alignment problem. It's also a propulsion problem. If the head pulls out of line, well, guess what? The shoulders are going to be out of line. And if the shoulders are out of position, it's going to be a lot harder for swimmers to pull effectively. Everything needs to be lined up so that swimmers can drop the arm in right where it needs to be and pull back. So it's really difficult to execute effective pulling mechanics if the shoulders aren't in the right position to allow swimmers to put their arms in the right position and then create force with the strongest muscles of the body. So if the breathing's pulling the body offline, the pull is going to be affected just as much as alignment's going to be effective. Lastly, it becomes a timing issue as well. And so fast swimming is all about precision and the right thing happening at the right time. If the head's moving more than it needs to during the breath, it's going to take more time. If swimmers are just slow with the breath, it's going to take more time. And so one of two things are going to happen. Swimmers are going to either lose effective stroke timing, which is definitely not going to help them swim fast, or they'll be able to maintain effective stroke timing, but only by slowing everything down. And if it takes longer to perform the same skills, that means their stroke rate's going to be lower, and it's going to be unnecessarily lower, which means they're going to swim slower than they otherwise could. So for these reasons, breathing is really important. If breathing's not good, swimmers are going to slow down because they negatively impact their alignment. Up goes resistance. Swimmers are going to slow down because they don't create enough propulsion. Down goes speed, and the timing's either going to be off, which is going to make it harder to create propulsion and maintain alignment, or timing might be maintained, but the longer that breath takes, the longer the stroke cycle takes, which is also going to slow swimmers down. So what is effective breathing? While it may be difficult for swimmers to do, effective breathing is ultimately simple, at least from a conceptual standpoint. The breath needs to be low, the breath needs to be straight, and the breath needs to be fast. With a low breath, the head should lift as little as possible. And the more the head lifts, the more the hips are going to go down. That means more resistance. That means less speed. The breath also needs to be straight, in that the head shouldn't pull to the side. It should rotate in order to get the mouth clear so that swimmers can breathe. And the more the head pulls to the side, the bigger the disruption of alignment, the more side-to-side swimming that you'll see. And when the breath is high and when the breath is not straight, the more that happens, the more that the arms are going to have to compensate. Because the head's offline, swimmers are going to be less stable, and they're going to have to use their arms to kind of brace, compensate to make sure that they don't lose their balance. If their arms are compensating, they're not creating propulsion, and that's no good. Lastly, the breath also needs to be fast. And so no matter what, no matter how great that breath is, it's going to disrupt the stroke a little bit, and that's why swimmers tend to not breathe in a 50. And so swimmers have to keep the breath as fast as possible, because the longer it takes, the bigger the impact there's going to be. And so even if swimmers are breathing really, really well, it needs to be fast to minimize the impact. And if swimmers are breathing really poorly, it probably needs to be even faster because they need to minimize the amount of time that they're executing poor skills. So now let's take a look at it in action. And this is probably one of the best breaths I've seen. There's no disruption of the rhythm of the stroke. There's no lifting of the head. There's no pulling it to the side. And man, that breath is fast. And so this is a really good example of a breath executed really well, because there's very little disruption to the stroke, there's no up and down motion, there's no side to side motion, and that breath is fast, and so the rhythm and timing of the stroke is not being disrupted. And so the faster swimmers can breathe, the more effective they're going to be at maintaining their skills even when they do breathe. So we'll take a look at it with a different swimmer from a different angle, and what you can see is that head is not lifting up. There's no side-to-side motion. So if there was a steel rod coming right through her spine, that head stays right on that steel rod. It just turns. It doesn't lift. It doesn't pull to the side. It's right exactly where it needs to be, and there's no disruption of alignment. The pulls are not being affected at all, and her breath is fast. So another really good example, maybe not quite as aggressive as that previous example in terms of the speed of the breath, but the same impact in that there's very little disruption of the stroke, and that's what allows her to go fast. And that is a huge advantage in terms of going fast. So why is improving the breath difficult? What's the challenge? Well, first of all, humans want air, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to get it. They do not care about swimming fast nearly as much as they care about staying alive. And so they're going to choose movements, they're going to choose motions that ensure they get a good breath, even if that compromises their speed by a couple tenths of a second. And so they're going to breathe in ways that ensure that they get air into their mouth as opposed to water. And the easiest way to do that is to lift up, to pull the head to the side, to ensure that it's a safe breath. So to help swimmers breathe more effectively and ensure that they get air, we have to help them find strategies that allow them to feel safe with a more aggressive breath and doesn't increase the likelihood that they're going to inhale water, which is obviously going to be a big problem. The second issue is the quality of the feedback. In most cases, they've been breathing during freestyle for a very long time. The older the swimmer, the more likely that's the case. So they can't necessarily feel what they're doing. What feels right to them may not be right, but that's what feels normal. And anything different from that is going to feel wrong. It's going to feel bad. And they can't necessarily perceive that what they're doing isn't that effective. And so as a result, they don't understand necessarily what they do because they're very used to swimming a certain way, and that's what feels right, that's what feels good. And if they can't feel it, they can't understand it, they're not going to be able to create change, they're not going to be able to fix it. And lastly, improving the breath is actually about doing less. And so it's a lot harder to move less. And so from a conceptual standpoint, independent of swimming, trying to get people to do less with their movement is pretty counterintuitive, and it's a little bit harder for them to conceptualize. So we have to help swimmers understand what it's like to have a smaller, cleaner breath, and that can be pretty counterintuitive to most swimmers. So when it comes to solutions, we have to make sure that swimmers are comfortable breathing and they're not feel like they're under threat. And if they've been swimming a long time, they probably don't necessarily feel those threats anymore. However, if they learned the skill when they were young and when they were concerned about breathing, that skill may still have remnants of that fear because that's the state that they learned it in. So we have to undo that. We're going to have to help them understand there's a different way of breathing because you are comfortable in the water, because you are safe, because you don't need to worry about choking on water. And to do that, we have to help them feel more effective ways to breathe, and we have to help them become more aware of how their breath is impacting their stroke and how they're breathing so that they can better perceive, better understand new opportunities to breathe and help them find ways to breathe lower, straighter, and faster. Ground zero for improving breathing is managing air. So swimmers have to be comfortable in the water to execute effective breathing. There's two main skills here. They have to understand how to exchange air. They have to understand how to float. And so to help them learn how to exchange air, simple bobbing exercises can be really good where they're focusing on inhaling and exhaling with rhythm. You can do it in a lot of different ways, and for more advanced swimmers, it may not be necessary, but especially at the early stages of learning, it can be really important for swimmers to understand how to inhale when the head's out of the water and exhale when the head is in the water, and do so in a fluid rhythm and control their breathing rather than just breathing whenever they want. Secondly, different floating exercises can be really effective. Starting with a ball float can be really useful for helping swimmers understand how the lungs support them and hold them in the water, allows them to be comfortable. And then by expanding into an X position, they can learn how to control their limbs and still manage their body position. There are a lot of different floating options that you can use, just as there's different variations of bobbing options. All of them can be really useful. You just want to challenge swimmers in different ways so that they get good at exchanging their air, and when the air is in their lungs, they can use that air to manage their position and be more comfortable, more stable, more relaxed in the water. So this is a super simple bobbing exercise. All they do is exhale under the water, inhale when the head comes above the water. And so this can be done in deeper water, can be done in shallower water. You can have swimmers hold their hands on the side of the pool to get a little bit more support. It's all about just patient, relaxed, rhythmic air exchange. Nothing fancy, but for swimmers that don't have that skill, it can make a huge difference. Here we have the ball float to X float, and so during the ball float, they're going to rest at the surface of the water, and they're going to rest at the surface comfortably, and then they just expand out into an X position, and they have to learn how to press into the water. They have to learn how to create tension with the backs of their legs to maintain a stable and effective position at the surface of the water. You can use lots of different letters. You can use lots of different positions. They're all challenge swimmers in different ways. The idea is to help them find ways to support themselves, be stable, be comfortable in the water, and then manage their position in order to stay relaxed on the surface of the water. So with paddle cap freestyle, swimmers are going to swim with a paddle on their head. And when they breathe, if they lift the head, they pull the head to the side, the paddle is going to come off. And so it's a really powerful strategy because it provides immediate feedback. As soon as swimmers make a mistake, that paddle's coming off. And as soon as swimmers do it well, that paddle's staying on. And it's relevant feedback. It gives them feedback about the skill that you're trying to improve. And it's very clear feedback. The paddle either stays on or it comes off. And so by providing them with immediate, relevant, and clear feedback, that's going to be really effective for learning because swimmers figure out really quickly what works and what doesn't. It's also extremely simple. It's extremely effective. The task does the teaching for you. So whether you have one swimmer in the pool or 30, they can all do the same thing at the same time. And that paddle is going to give them feedback as to whether they're breathing effectively or not. And it's going to give them immediate feedback as to whether they're breathing effectively or not. So you can coach just as well with 30 swimmers as compared to one swimmer. And that means you can get a lot more change in a lot less time. So here it is in action. Straightforward, simple. Low breath, straight breath, the paddle stays on. High breath, wide breath, the paddle comes off. And so again, it's really effective at helping swimmers understand effective breathing mechanics. And if they're not effective, they're lifting up, they're pulling to the side, that paddle's coming off, and they'll know it right away. And that encourages them to do something different to create a change so that that paddle stays on. Next up is stroke and roll. And so some swimmers really struggle with lifting the head. And so with this activity, we're going to have them roll to the breath, exaggerate the roll. There's zero lifting of the head, and that can really help them understand the rotational aspect of the breath. So what we'll have them do here is after a certain number of strokes, they're going to roll completely onto the back when they breathe. And that exaggerated movement is going to allow them to feel the rotation that comes with breathing. The goal here is to help swimmers feel that rotational component, and once they can feel it and understand it, the goal is then to work it into regular freestyle. So if swimmers are struggling with lifting rather than rotating, it can be a really effective tool to encourage them to swim differently. So if we see here, he's going to take a couple strokes and he's going to roll right onto his back. And so as you saw, there's no lifting of the head. Yeah, it's an exaggerated rotation, more than he would do, but it allows him to understand how to rotate to breathe as opposed to lift to breathe. And when they do it, when they're actually swimming, it's going to be a much smaller motion, but it allows them again to focus on the feeling of rotation rather than lifting, and they can start to incorporate that into their regular swimming. We talked about earlier about it's important to help them get a feel for what they need to do. This is a strategy that can help them get a feel for the rotation as opposed to just lifting the head. So as we've talked about, the sensory aspect is really important. And swimmers can't change what they can't feel. And so this is where we can use a snorkel strategically to help them do so. So you have them wear a snorkel and have them pay attention so that they can feel what it's like to swim freestyle without any disruption of the breath. Then they take the snorkel off and they try to recreate those same sensations even when they're breathing. And by alternating back and forth between wearing a snorkel and swimming without a snorkel, and so by alternating between wearing a snorkel and swimming without a snorkel, the goal is to minimize the difference between swimming with a snorkel and then swimming while breathing. And the smaller the gap, the better the breath. And so over time, the more that swimmers can make their freestyle when they're breathing feel like when they're swimming with a snorkel, the better the breathing is going to be. And so it's all about giving them a sensory goal when they're wearing the snorkel and then trying to match that sensation when they're swimming with regular breathing. Next up is a drill called UNCO. And so too many swimmers pull before completing the breath. And that happens for two reasons. One, the pull is too fast, so they just let the arm drop right away. And the second issue is that the breath is too slow. So if they take too much time to get the head back, they're going to start pulling early. And so UNCO is one-arm freestyle when they're breathing to the opposite side. So if they're using their left arm, they're breathing to the right. And if swimmers are slow with the breath or they rush the pull, they're not going to go anywhere because they're already going to be halfway through the pull by the time that they get their head back in line and they're in position to pull effectively. So by using this strategy, they can start to feel when they rush the pull or when they're slow with the breath, and they're going to be more aware of what they need to do in order to make things happen at the right time so that they can get an effective pull every time they breathe. And so they can do that by, one, being more patient out in front with the arm, or two, breathing faster. Now, if you ask them to do this drill fast, well, they're going to be under a lot more pressure to make both those happen, and they're more likely to improve in both skills. So this is a really effective strategy. If swimmers are rushing the pull on the non-breathing side, or if they're really slow with the breath, it can help them figure out how to be faster with the breath, more patient with the pull, and sync up the timing so when they breathe, their pull is not compromised. So if we watch here, he's going to have to breathe fast, and he's going to have to be patient with that arm. So you see there, he got the head back down before he really got into the pull. And by using just that one arm, it's going to give him a lot of feedback as to whether he's doing that effectively. And if he's breathing too slow or he's pulling too fast, he's going to lose that entire right arm. And then he's not going to go anywhere because he's not going to have that left arm to support it or bail it out. He can do something with the kick, but it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be fast, especially if you ask him to go fast. So he's got to be patient with that pull there and then fast with the breath, and that's going to get him back in line in time to pull effectively. Even if swimmers have good technical breaths, a lot of swimmers breathe too slow. And if they breathe slow, like we talked about earlier, the impact of the breath is going to be magnified. And since the breath's impact is usually negative, that is not a good thing. And so one of the reasons that the breath is slow is that swimmers are visual beings. Humans tend to move based on vision, even if it's not the most effective way, even if it's slow. And so if swimmers are taking the breath, they're waiting, they're looking, they're seeing something, they're focusing, and then putting their head back down, that's going to take a lot more time than if they don't look for anything in the first place. So the solution, have them close their eyes when they breathe. Have them open the eyes under the water because that's a whole lot safer. But when they close the eyes during the breath, they stop looking to breathe, and that allows them to breathe a whole lot faster. And so it's surprisingly effective, especially with swimmers that have slow breaths. They tend to breathe a whole lot faster. They tend to breathe lower. They tend to breathe straighter. It's one of those things that tends to work, and so it's a strategy I like to use all the time. And you can have them do it while they're swimming regular freestyle, or you can have them do it when they're using any of the strategies we've talked about so far. One of the most important ideas for improving breathing is that you have to challenge it. And so one of the best ways to challenge it is lots of variation. Using all the different strategies in lots of different ways is going to be a lot more effective than using one strategy in one way. Let them feel the impact of the breath in a lot of different ways, and that's going to accelerate their learning. Also, ask them to perform all the strategies, all the drills at a variety of stroke rates, at a variety of speeds, because ultimately they have to breathe effectively when they race. And so if they never practice at higher stroke rates or higher speeds, they're probably not going to be able to execute those skills at higher stroke rates or higher speeds. And even if they swim primarily over longer distances, practicing these skills at high rates and high speeds is going to make executing those skills at slower speeds and slower rates a whole lot easier. You can also use training aids with all these strategies. It's certainly going to create a different feel, a different challenge, and in many cases, it can make it more difficult as well, further allowing for challenge, which allows for better learning. You can also execute all these different strategies with different breathing patterns. Sometimes swimmers can do it really well if they breathe every two, only to their preferred side, but they struggle when they go to the opposite side. And just doing the opposite side can be really useful for helping them improve their preferred side. It just feels a little bit different. Usually they can get some insight into what's happening on their preferred side. Having them breathe bilaterally, it's just a different rhythm. It's a different challenge. Breathing every 3 or every 5 is different than breathing exclusively to the right or exclusively to the left, regardless of the preferred side. So by challenging it in different ways with variation, performance, training aids, and breathing patterns, we're going to get more learning, we're going to get more effective learning, and we're going to get more robust skills that can handle the pressure of competition. So here's a skill-based set that can help swimmers improve their breathing. So they're going to go 4 rounds through the whole thing. They're going to go a 25 stroke and roll, 25 UNCO, 25 paddle cap freestyle, different ways to challenge the skills, And then a 50 freestyle solid effort. They do that small piece 3 times, and after 3 times, they go 100 strong effort. They're trying to hit the same stroke count and speed each 100. And by round, they're going to go breathe every 4 to the left, every 4 to the right, every 2 to the left, every 2 to the right. So we've got 3 different drills that we're going to do. We've got different breathing patterns by round. We've got multiple opportunities to take what they're doing during the drills and try to apply it during the swimming. And they have opportunities at the end of each round to put a little bit of speed into that and try to make it happen in a little bit more challenging situation. So a lot of different ways to challenge the breath, a lot of different ways to improve the breath, all while keeping it moving. This set has a little bit more of an endurance feel. They're going to go 425s paddle cap freestyle on short rest, and they're going to go with a different breathing pattern each section. So the first piece is odd breathe 5, evens breathe 3. The next section is breathe every 4, odds left, evens right. And then the next section is breathe every 2, odds left, evens right. And the 6 100s are going to be done the same way each round. The odds are with a snorkel. The evens are breathe 25 left, 25 right. And they're going to go the same stroke count, the same speed on each 100. So regardless of whether they have the snorkel or whether they're breathing, they're trying to make it feel and trying to make it be exactly the same. And by round, they're going to add a stroke for those hundreds, and they're going to try to go faster. So by the last round, they're going to be taking 2 more strokes as compared to the first round, but they should be able to go significantly faster, but they still want to be consistent with the stroke count and still want to be consistent with the speed regardless of the breathing pattern. So a little bit more of an endurance focus here with a big emphasis on breathing skill. This last set is more of a speed set. We're going to go 3 rounds through. They're going to go 425s, paddle cap freestyle, build to fast. The odds are breathe every 4. The evens are breathe every 2. Then they're going to go 25 UNCO with fins, fast. So they're really getting moving here, especially with the fins. They're going to have to be really fast, really effective with that breath. First one's breathe every 4. The second one's breathe every 2. Then they're going 325s freestyle, minimize stroke count and time. They're going to breathe every 5, every 4, every 3. And then they're going to go 25 freestyle fast, breathe every 2. So we've got different drills here. We got different types of speed here. We're going build. We're going fast with fins, so some overspeed. We're going minimize stroke count and time. And we're going straight up fast. And we've got different breathing patterns throughout as well to challenge swimmers in different ways so that they can learn how to execute these skills really well at high speeds, which is the ultimate challenge, is executing a breath while swimming at maximal speed and not having it negatively impact the stroke. If you want to learn more about effective breathing skill in elite swimmers, check out the video below.